Hello, everybody. My name is Ned Burwell. I'm here with Monika and Graham Burwise. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening, guys.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Hi, Ned.
So, Monika and Graham are the founders of the Global Awakening Institute. They're experts in the field of personal development, and they've helped many people make lasting changes in the areas of relationships, individual growth, personal empowerment, spiritual development, and I'm sure so many more other avenues. You're both international speakers and writers. Monika, you have a book published, Knock Knock, Who's There? In Search of the Holy Grail. So, and I'm sure I'm just capturing a very slim sliver of your accolades, but thanks for agreeing to do this talk. We're going to talk about creativity tonight, and who knows what else. So what I've been noticing, and when I look out and when I listen, what I see in the world is that, and this is probably my world reflecting back to me, but I'm sure others are experiencing this as well. I see that we've been through a time of what's called liminal space, where we're sort of kind of caught in this limbo period, or a period of uncertainty. And after all the things we went through, what was going to be in the future had not yet arrived. How our lives were in the past were never going to be the same. So as we move through this space and time of liminal space, I think we've moved into a time where we need to be consciously creating. And I say that in a sense that we need to start moving the creations that are calling us to move within our hearts, within our souls. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective, and very valid. However, when it comes to the whole idea of consciously creating, for me, the consciously part, I think awareness fits that descriptor better, because in my understanding, you can't really control your creativity. It flows whether you're engaged or not. I think for me, it's more about being aware of what you're creating, being aware of the process, and awareness has the flip side also of being aware of yourself to the point where you can clean up your, for lack of a better word, messy ego stuff, and be less conflicted, more clear, more present, and more in tune with the rest of the world and the larger. We have a term, the one thing going on, because we're both non-duality nuts. So yeah, for me, it's more really about awareness, because from the perspective of non-duality, we don't really have much choice or control. That seems to be somewhat of an illusion of the ego.
And I think when I say conscious creating, I mean that we start to move into a deeper place in ourselves and expressing that, or
Yes.
being more live on the floor with whatever's coming with us. And when I say conscious, I mean a greater awareness, right? And not, instead of just moving every creation that we desire in the mind, but rather listening to what is coming up in us. Who's showing up in our lives. That's being conscious of what is going on around us, and then creating within that space.
Right.
So when I heard this subject, this topic, I kind of giggled, because it is a large subject, and I'm thinking Ned did it again, and it's like talking about God or love, It's something that cannot be described, and however many people is going to talk to you and discuss creativity, that's how many views will be on it, because creativity is at the forefront of all there is. So everything is the creativity is the context for all there is. I would say it's the same like love is the context for all there is, and perhaps God. So is it possible that God, creation, and love is the fabrics of the same thing? And that's why I was wondering how deep do you want to take this conversation, because we can take many different avenues, and that really depends on the state of our being rather than our doing. But of course, there are steps that can position us in a little bit more, I would say, relaxed state in which we are able to observe what is happening with us, around us, and to us. And I think that's what a lot of people assume creativity is. And as you mentioned, conscious creation, and that's what we had a deliberation with Graham before this interview, because we thought we are creating at all times. Everything we do, everything that we have in our lives is a creation of ours.
So what I was going to say was that, creativity, for obvious reasons, must be viewed probably as a multi-layered thing. And, there's creativity on a physical level where you're creating the life that you want. And that seems to be very attractive to a large number of people. And that will probably be the biggest interpretation from the majority of people will be, how do I create what I want in this life? And that's a big part of creativity for sure. But there are layers beyond that where you kind of step out of the way and you allow creativity to flow where the mind is not so engaged, where you're more just aware rather than in control. You're not trying to manipulate it, you're not trying to control it, and therefore the creativity is, for lack of a better word, cleaner. Just to illustrate what I mean is, a friend of mine once, we were chatting at a bus stop, and a Ferrari drove by, and he said, "Oh, I would kill for one of those." And I said to him, "Well, considering you're a student and don't have a large income, servicing that thing would be a big headache. Buying new tires every time you hit a pothole would be bankrupting. So is that really something you need in your life right now?" And he kind of thought about it for a second, and he said, "I never thought to stop and look at it that way. The mind always just wants what it wants, and we never think to question that." The term I use is cleaner, because they're not corrosive or destructive to our lives. They are what's meant to be for us.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your way of thinking about creativity, so we can more direct our comments towards your understanding?
I think you're right on the money when you say that it's a very vast topic, and there's an infinite amount of directions that we could go with this talk. But to maybe dial it back to its most basic form to begin with, and then we can sort of blow this up as we go along. Yeah. I think when you look at the topic of creativity, there'll be a certain amount of people that say, "Yeah, I get that. I can do that. I am creative." But then there's going to be maybe another group of people, and probably larger group of people, that sort of shrivel back in their seats and would say, "Oh, I'm not creative." But I think what happens is we look at creativity as being an outward function and an outward doing. And I think you had touched on that at the beginning. So creativity is not so much about being an artist or a musician or an athlete. Rather, it's the ability to listen to a spark or an idea that's arising in us, to listen to the direction that flows out of us.
But also think about this, Ned. A lot of people position creativity as, I need to write a book, I need to paint a painting, or write a poem. And that's as far as creativity is being discussed in a society, right? What about the mother who creates a beautiful dinner for her family, or raises her children in some wonderful way, or a teacher who in a very creative way teaches its students? And examples are many. So we are creating all the time. It's just certain avenues of creation may not necessarily be recognized in a society, right?
And I think that's sort of when we bring up the idea that being creative or tapping into creativity isn't just limited to a small group of people, but rather it's a means or a way that we could live that's more in sync with our creator, which lives within inside of us. You want to say something to that, Graham?
Yeah. So I thought I'd just kind of lay a foundation, and this comes from my belief about the nature of reality and the nature of ourselves. We are constantly creating the life we're living. There's no arguing that. We are creating what we're experiencing. By default, if we're not aware of it, or we can be more aware and involved in the process. And I think that's what you're kind of alluding to, of being more engaged in that, and not blindly creating by default things which half the time are not suited to our growth and development. Maybe the best analogy is to think of it like tuning a radio. If you get exactly on the frequency, it's clear, there's no crackle, there's no static, it's just a clean signal. But when you get not well attuned, it's very difficult to hear what's being said because things are distorted. And I think that's what happens that's the difference between conscious creation, or being more aware and engaged in the process, rather than creating by default.
Well, and again, the first step is the awareness that I can move creation through me, but that's only a partial truth. Right. As we work through this, we can see what our role in relationship is in working with creativity and through creation.
Well, I understand that you have a certain blueprint that you follow in order to get yourself in a certain state. Would it be accurate?
It's moving into a creative space. It's just as close as my next breath. It's not. There's nothing that has to happen. There's no internal conditions that have to be met, other than just me surrendering to the silence within me.
So this is a very advanced step, and it's usually for people who either used meditation for a very long time, or did a lot of work on themselves, or did a lot of creative work, and it's very automatic for them. Because I think in that sense, creativity is like muscle. The more you use it, the easier it gets, right?
That's right.
And for some people, there is a blueprint. There are steps that they would need to follow in order for them to get themselves into some sort of a space from which the creativity may flow. So it could be also, we can discuss that. And for some people, it will be meditation, going into nature, lighting a candle, playing some soft music. And then what happens in those moments most likely is that the ego steps back a little bit, and then they are able to see themselves in the more relaxed state. for you, that state might come naturally because you do it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
would you say that it's stepping back of the ego when we are the most creative?
Yes, absolutely. And, it makes, using your words, Graham, a cleaner experience of moving into that mode of creation when we can let go of any sense of self in that while we do in that. But again, that's probably 3 steps ahead of maybe some people. They wouldn't understand. And if we start with understanding that we're all creative. Creativity is a vast subject that covers just about everything in life. Every movement and choice and thing that we do in life is a mode or a form of creation. And so that's sort of step one, giving people the idea that we're not, there's only a chosen few that do this, that we're all doing it already in our lives. And then, so what is
important to add to that, we're all doing it equally powerfully. Nobody's
100%.
more creative than another.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's sort of like light coming through a lens. If the lens is colored, the light coming through will be colored and tinted that way. But I think there's this natural intelligence in things that, if you desire a certain thing and it's not really meant for you right now, you may get it, but it's going to be painful for you to experience that. And then you're going to have to maybe let it go. So it's constantly teaching you about you. The whole process is about growth. Life, the whole journey is really all about growth. Everything else, I think, is kind of secondary to that.
There are 2 things that popped into my head. One, creativity as a doing, and one, creativity as a being, right? Because the doing will have an easier way to understand. If I do this, this will happen. If I sit down and write for 2 hours, sooner or later I will get the juices flowing. And again, so it's all in a description of doing. And then there is a creativity as our state of being, and that's a little bit different concept. The more you write, the more you write, the more confident in writing you become. The more you speak, you go on a stage once, twice, 100 times, the more confident you become, and therefore it flows through you. So, so I think people are also not confident enough because they never tried. They only come from the judgment, right? So we say everyone, even you, can be creative, and you say, and whoever say, no, but I haven't done that before. I don't have an experience. I don't know how to. And what do you say to a person like this? You have to practice, practice, practice. At first, like I mentioned before, it's like a muscle. Intuition is like a muscle as well, right?
What you're saying is bang on. Once I learned how to disconnect from my mind and just move into this role further and further, it is sort of stopped stifling my ability to move and channel creation through me. Now, one of the biggest barriers that prevents us from going into tapping into this innate creativity that rests within all of us is my mind. My mind was the biggest barrier. And that's when I look at the obstacle of the mind in creation, it's one of the biggest barriers. So within the confines of the mind, we make up a lot of things. We make up our sense of reality at times, if it's a made up mind reality, or we make up a lot of limitations, and that takes us back to the start where I say people may not think, oh, I'm not creative. So we make up limitations and we live to those standards.
It just struck me that the creativity you're talking about and a lot of those limitations probably come from things like worldview. Somebody who sees things from a deeply religious perspective, where God runs the show, you are not in charge of that, might look at creativity as, or very differently to somebody who has a different worldview, where more towards the, let's say, the Indian perspective, where the highest self is considered to be God or divine, which gives you more license and access automatically.
You know, if you look at the Vedic philosophy on creation, there's a term called Haranyagarbha, and that the golden egg, that creation comes to us fully formed, with all the potentials already worked out. And instead of us being the beginning of creation, we're the end of creation. We're the last 1% that moves creation into this physical world. But there's everything is created before the idea, the spark of creativity comes to us. It's already formed and created. And, you know, we're just chosen, and it flows through us, and we're the completion of creation, which is a really interesting point to think about.
What if there is not very much that we can choose? What if the creativity or a specific creative expression is chosen for this persona, which is called Ned, and maybe Ned didn't have to do anything particularly, it was just predestined that Ned is going to produce those kind of things. What if you had a step-by-step directive, as detailed as possible, and you gave it to somebody and say, listen, that's what I did throughout many years. That's what I learned. Those are the steps I did. I meditated that much. I did those. If you follow this, you're going to be in the same place as I am. Do you think that would happen?
Absolutely not. And there's certain, like, we set up an environment in ourselves to open us up to a potential to move into that creative space, or to move into an intuitive space, move into a divine space. You know, we can interchange all these words, right? But the means in which, or the way that I'm going to move into it, will be different than another's. I think it's, you know, we identify that creation, or this deeper wisdom or plan, so to speak, within us, will ultimately move through our experience. And if we learn how to surrender the mind a bit, maybe a lot, and also learn how to be quiet enough to hear that inner knowing that we have. It's like the voice of the heart, or the voice in the silence, is a few decibels lower than the voices in your head. So that's sort of the first step to discerning, you know, bringing forward a creation. Because I think that we're predestined to have certain experiences, certain creations are coming to this persona, Ned. Creations are coming to you guys for you to express. And so the importance of moving into a creative role in life is really about becoming in tune enough to listen to that inner voice that will guide you in the most divine way.
Yeah, and the way most people would understand that best is probably the term authenticity. You know, if you're authentic to who you are, then your expressions are part of your being. This is who you are. You're not choosing to do that. This is your path. So society tries to do the cookie cutter thing and say you must be this productive for this long before you can retire for that much, you know, and that kind of is very restrictive and constraining for most people, because they're all trying to fit into a little box that's not authentic to who they are. this ties in with what we really do a lot with clients, like the first stages of personal growth and development, where we help people tap into their own authenticity rather than chasing dreams and hopes and fears and demand and expectations from outside, but to rather listen to what is authentically them. And then there's a natural flow. There's no difficulty, there's no procrastination, there's no hesitance, there's super confidence, and it just naturally comes from you because that's who you are. You've discovered who you are meant to be.
And it seems that we were just talking that creativity follows intuition. So intuition and creativity are very from the same family, right? And who listens to their intuition? How can you follow your intuition? How come some people are super intuitive and some people say, I know nothing, I can hear nothing, I have no intuition. How do you do this? And yet every one of us have intuition or being intuitive. So again, it's like muscle. You use it for a period of time on the small things, and you grow it. Like you would go to the gym, and after 3 months, you would start seeing some muscle, and you become confident in that voice that you are hearing, because that's also about confidence. You became aware of your voice. You started to follow it. You started to get results, and you started to trust it more and more, and you became confident in that voice. And now it's easy for you. And in following your voice, you became more creative because that voice is telling you, Ned, you got to sit down and for 2 hours you need to write, or you got to do this art design that you never thought of. And you trust this voice and you follow this voice. What about people who don't have the voice?
Yeah, and I think it does start with getting into the right relationship with your mind and your body. We look at the mind as, this is who I am. Not even close. We look at the body like, this is me. Yeah, I move about in this body, but I'm not identified that this body is who and what I am. And the emotions in the body, we identify with those. We say, constantly, I'm hungry, I'm happy, I'm angry. Though those are just indications of what it is that we need in that moment, maybe, or it's information for us to process, but not who we are. Like over in Ireland, they say anger is upon me. It's like, I'm not angry, but anger is upon me. So it's information.
It's a dissociated way of, and that's beautiful because, all of those different emotional experiences are really indicating to us what our mental state is doing at the time. And, the body is a vessel. It allows us to be present here and function in the world. So it must be taken care of. It has needs we need to accommodate. But you're dead right in saying that the body is not me. The body is a vessel. But that just brought up an interesting thought in the back of my mind while I was thinking that. And the entire world is conditioned to buy things from the look of the packaging rather than to really look at the quality inside. And I think the same thing applies to the body and the mind. We're looking at this and we're just assuming that this is me, when in fact it's not you, because a very simple way to kind of illustrate that is to say, well, all right, so you have an accident, you lose one arm, one leg, and half of another leg. Are you still a complete Ned? Yes, you are.
Yes, yeah.
And that's proof enough for me that I am not my body. It's just my vehicle.
When I'm channeling creation, whether it's writing or working on my clients, I'm in the dark. I don't know what's going to happen. And because creation is not, it doesn't come from the mind, it rises up from within. I'm in the dark all the time. And I'm comfortable with that. And that's a clue for us to tap into the creative space within us a little further. Is it to set the mind down? It's a necessary tool, but not a needed companion when it comes to going into the mode of creation. So when I'm creating, writing, speaking, tattooing, I'm in the dark. I'm always in the dark, and I'm watching the movement of creation come out of me. And it's that surrender. So I think that's another giant part of moving creation in the world is learning how to surrender everything. And the more we surrender, we become, like you say, Monica, a more viable host for creation to move through. The conduit gets larger in us, our ability.
My mind is throwing up all kinds of things here. So yeah, but back to that point we made in the beginning, where we're all equally creating, equally powerfully, but we're not aware of that. We don't realize how much and how powerfully we're creating.
If we're truly in that mode of creation, we're allowing it to choose us rather we choose it.
Right.
And so when I think about what is my relationship to moving creation, to channeling creativity, it's that, I sometimes will say, well, the heart is a lousy travel companion because it'll sometimes tell you to go in the opposite direction that your mind wants to. And so creativity is the same way. It can be this lousy guide, but it's perfect, but it's lousy in the sense that my mind thinks this should be different. But in that surrender, we learn how to trust, and that the guidance that comes out of that creativity or out of the soul is like flawless. It comes to us in divine time with cosmic accuracy, and it knows more than we do. And so that's another thing that I feel about creation that comes to us and chooses us to move through, is that it has its own intelligence built in. Yet another reason to learn how to surrender. And once we do learn how to surrender, we trust that everything is in perfect alignment to move through us. And what should move through us? The divine brings that to us and offers it to us. We don't have to try to think about it. Much like driving a car, we don't have to do much work. We just steer, and the car does all the work.
Confidence.
Yeah. So that's a beautiful analogy. You're basically pushing buttons, pedals, and steering. You're not powering that vehicle. You're not making it work. And it doesn't really matter from which sacred text you investigate, but they all kind of say the same thing. In the Bible, it talks about God created you and knows your birth to your death, every hair on your head. So that's kind of telling me that it's about surrender. It's not about making choices and being in control. The same applies in if you're talking about Maharshi, in the non-duality
Guru, Indian Guru,
his non-duality teaching, he says, it's kind of predestined, where, if something is meant for you, it will happen. You cannot avoid it. And if it's not meant for you, you can stand on your head.
And it's not going to happen.
And it's never going to happen for you.
And I think for people that it hasn't become an automatic thing, is the first step is learning how to stop talking to ourselves. In talking to, when I say ourselves, the made-up self, stop talking to your mind. There's always going to be a stream of thoughts dropping into you, which you can't change those thoughts, but you can determine whether you think about them.
Yes, whether you engage and invest.
That's right. And so, and the next step is to realize, okay, so we stopped speaking to ourselves. We stop reacting to the feelings or emotions that are moving in our bodies, and then we start to deeply listen. You know, there was a researcher named Pauline Oliveros, and she coined this term, deep listening. And I first heard about this. I interviewed a doctor from Australia, Sean Botha, and he did his thesis on listening. And it was so fascinating to hear him speak. And he referred to Pauline Oliveros' work about deep listening. And when he described how we listen deeply, it was like, this is exactly what I do. This is my process. So when I'm writing and I'm opening myself up to be a channel for information just to flow out of me, I'm listening to the silence. I'm listening to this quiet space. I'm listening for the words to arise. I'm listening with my body. I'm listening with my fingers. I'm listening with my eyes, my ears. You know, I'm listening to the room. It's like you're listening with everything. You're listening through the walls of the space that you're living in.
Interesting.
And again, that's it's like exercising a muscle, because it's not something that you're going to be good at right off the bat. It takes practicing. And
that's right.
Modern psychology has a concept that aligns with that, and it's a pretty recent development. They're starting to talk about listening to your body function and what's happening within you in terms of gaining better understanding of what's happening to you at an emotional and more spiritual level. So you kind of get, the more you attune to what's happening, the processes of the body, the more you're able to get insights, very deep insights into your emotional state, your spiritual awareness, your state of consciousness, all kinds of things.
But it's very important, because we are trying to portray this and impact people who might not understand what we are talking about. And for them, deep listening will be engaging all the senses, and how we are listening is through the filter of our upbringing and our conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
So most people will not understand what they are listening for.
Yeah.
And I think what you are talking about, Ned, is exactly the thing that I do when I work with clients. It's actually, it's not even listening with the senses. It's listening beyond the senses.
Exactly. Listening with everything.
And trusting, because you trust your that space to create the art. I, for example, trust that space to be able to do the best service for my client. And it's almost like the Monika stopped existing. And when that happens, I have an access to the things I wouldn't have access if Monika was in the room. And I have a sense that you have a similar experience.
Absolutely. And when I was telling Graham yesterday, when we spoke, that when I write from bottom up. So the psychologist E.J. Gibson coined this term, bottom up processing. And so I start with what I don't know when I begin to write. So I'll ask myself a question that my mind can't answer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then I just start writing. I don't think about it. I just start writing. And it'll almost drive you mad, because you start writing things and you think, I'm just getting carried away here. This is my imagination. And it's quite funny because the term Harenyagarbha first came to me when I was writing my book Be Love, a book about awakening. So I'm writing about creation in that book, and I'm saying that creation comes to us fully formed and everything I explained about Harenyagarbha. And then I write all this stuff down and I think, I've really lost it. Like, people are going to think I am completely nuts and I'm making this stuff up. So I sat down the writing that night and I think, I need to back up from this because I think I really am losing my mind. So I flicked on a Netflix, or it was a Gaia program. It was about yoga. And as soon as I hit played where I left off from watching it previously, this little Indian man is sitting there and he totally says everything that I just wrote.
No way.
That I thought that I was crazy. And he just said,
think about this. This is a perfect exercise it's a perfect exercise to kill the ego.
That's right.
Because the ego, think about this, the function of the ego is to know and to exist. And with this exercise, you kind of put your ego in the corner.
Yeah, well, yeah, kill the ego is a very dodgy concept. I don't think we can ever destroy it. We can
and not in that sense, but you put it in the corner. It's like you don't know, you get off the way.
This ties in with what's coming up for me right now. I think a one way to look at this entire thing we're discussing is using the correct tool for the correct job. If you're trying to source creation out of your mind, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah.
But you can't argue that your mind is involved in your creative process. It must be running your fingers and your body and doing your thing and thinking out the process. I have to do this step first and this step. And that's all right. It's not about removing the mind completely from the equation. It's about assigning it the correct job in the process, which then just takes you like rocket fuel in the correct direction.
Very well. Using it as a tool.
And that the same. Exactly. It's same for the ego.
The same for the
In my understanding, the ego is the identity of the body, and it must be there to protect itself. It needs to function. It needs to eat. It needs sleep. It needs to know what it needs. So it has this ego. Unfortunately, what's happened is the ego has become very sophisticated and complex, and it's found a way to kind of sneak out of our control and kind of take charge of our lives. And for the most part, society kind of even encourages that. So, people are led around by this very juvenile thing, just looking for pleasure and enjoyment and entertainment in life. And probably that's why most people are feeling very unfulfilled, is because they're not tapping into anything useful. They're kind of just entertaining this almost false identity, this idea of who they are.
And there again is the importance of, having this discussion about creativity. What is it? What is our role in creation? And learning to play with that more. Looking at your life as your ultimate creation. How you move through this life. What do you study? What do you express? How you express? And when we do really get in tune with ourselves, with what's around us, being more conscious in what's showing up in our lives, and realizing that we're powerful creators, we can sort of harness that ability to create and move it in the most purposeful way. And purpose is something I sort of tore at me for a lot of years. I thought, what is my purpose? And I ran around asking people, can you tell me what my purpose is? And I met a guru. Can you tell me what my purpose is? I met a Maharishi, and can you tell me? But what I've discovered about purpose is that it works in our lives as a live feed, much like creation is moving in a live feed into our lives. And if we're quiet and we're listening, we're deeply listening to ourselves, to the environment around us, we know how to act, and we're responding from a much deeper place within us. We're not just reacting to life through our mind.
You're recognizing that what you're creating is authentic to you, rather than thinking you should be creating this way or that way.
What I would say in regards to your question about purpose, it's again, it's one of those things that can be taken 17 levels down, right? And we can, it's a big subject, and it all comes to one, to the one thing: know thyself, right? It's all comes down to know thyself, including love, God, creativity, intuition, purpose.
So following on from that, then basically your purpose is to align with your unique creativity.
So I think the easiest way to answer what your purpose is to look at your life now. Because then we can go into concept of time, the present, the past, all happening in the now. Yeah. And this is it. There is nothing out there beside what's right here. Right? So if you want to know your purpose, look at your life. This is as simple as it gets.
And when we are effectively moving the creations that come to us and choose us, we're fulfilling purpose. And the fulfillment of our purpose is no small thing. In my opinion, it makes new songs echo in the soul of the divine. You just sit in that, like our purpose moves and creates a new song to echo in the soul of God. So, like, I think it's that vast. I think that the movement of our creations is evolving God itself. There's a big concept.
That aligns with what I believe. I think the whole thing is evolving. You know, I think the idea of a static entity just doesn't make all that much logical sense. Why would everything around us be evolving if the whole is not evolving with it? And that kind of gives you a perspective on purpose, which is really expansive.
It's so important for us to just move that purpose, move creation out of ourselves. We all need to participate. There's no big players. There's no small players. We're all important. We're all spokes of the wheel.
That's it.
And that's where that, when I think about, if no matter how big or small the problems in the world are, I just need to participate in any way I can that does more good and promotes love and kindness and expansion of consciousness, and that it just ripples.
Yeah. So what I was going to say was, a good message to put out there with this whole thing is that people shouldn't really worry about what is my purpose and am I fulfilling this and am I valuable because everybody is functioning as part of a greater whole, and everybody contributes to that. And whether you're kind of mostly isolated, dealing with some kind of deep grief, or whether you've hermited yourself away in a forest to meditate for 10 years to see what comes up, or, whether you're running a corporation that serves people, or whether you're a nurse in a hospital that's just deeply caring and, concerned about people's health.
Or if you are an asshole in this lifetime, you also serve a purpose.
Exactly. So you can't do it wrong. You can't screw it up. Just keep doing what you're doing. The one caveat to that is that if you take the time to learn who you are and clean up all this chatter and stuff going on in the head and clear up who you are in terms of your idea of yourself and move beyond the persona, you can play greater and greater roles in this thing. It will use you at the level that you are capable of being used, that you are capable of functioning at.
When we start to look at our lives as a creation and understand that this topic is much bigger and there's so much more to unpack that this conversation could ever hold, we start to realize that we're always creating, and we've never been separate from the mode of creation. It's just learning how to tap into, there's a deeper mode of creation that can kind of move out of us, and then we get there by surrendering, listening, and being brave and willing enough to act upon what we know to be our truth. And even people that are not so good at listening to their soul or their spirit, or they say, I can't hear anything, they instinctually know. And that knowing in you is just as good as you hearing something. We instinctually know what it is that the heart wants to, and it's not that the heart wants, but what the heart knows to be our truth. Because the mind wants, the heart just knows, and we know our truth, and
that's why we have sometimes those kind of like an awe experience where you recognize something and it resonates within you so powerfully it can bring you to tears. That it's that knowing has been triggered.
When we start to create, we may be creating for this little tiny space. And then as we begin to create, this ability opens up, but then it gets, the trajectory of our creations get bigger and bigger until, like, we're the creations that we're moving through us have this power that pushes out further, like at an exponential rate. As I've grown my consciousness, my ability to project my consciousness into the world has gotten wider and further reach. But when I was the village idiot, because I went through a phase, I had no reach. I had no amount of consciousness. And it's just by learning to just keep tapping into self, knowing self, moving that creation, fulfilling purpose. It just has changed my life so much.
So what you're trying to say, that the Ned stepped off the way and let the universe take over.
Yeah.
You became a vessel of relations.
100%.
Yeah, I think that's an important way to look at things, and to see yourself as not the controlling influence, but rather the tool in a sense, or a vessel, a conduit, however you want to term it. Conduit's probably a good one because it implies flow.
Well, and it's like what I said to you on the phone today and the other day. We're like hydro lines for God. And a hydro line doesn't create power, but rather it's a means to transfer. And so we're all like transfer stations for the divine to move through us.
It's more than just transfer, though. It carries the thing from its origin to where it's needed.
That's great. Yeah. And that sort of helps us understand what is my relationship to what is created through me. It's not about me. It's about just learning to be that transfer station for the divine to work through, to be, as you say, a conduit. We've covered a few topics today. I think we've given people some things to think about. I deeply appreciate your time and your sharing your expertise. I know I'm going to contemplate a lot of things that you've said this evening and see how that expands me to discover new songs to echo in my soul. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and knowledge and to speak with me this evening.
Thank you so much, Ned. Always a pleasure.
Exactly the same sentiment right back at you, Ned. You know, like I said on the phone earlier when we spoke this morning, you know, there's that principle where two or more are gathered with a like-minded approach to things. Something magical happens. And I think we've done a great job just showing up and allowing it to happen. So thank you for the opportunity.